Human rights and the Fifth Estate.
Comunidad.
Daraja.
Smile.
Harambe.
Makar.
Righteousness.
Habla.
Human rights and the Fifth Estate.
I have a daughter and I have 5 grandchildren. I first started working at Wendy's in the beginning of the recession, and I needed a job, so I settled there. I saw all kinds of people from various walks of life coming into Wendy's for work. And it surprised me because these were teachers, they were business people, business owners, executives, and they were looking for work in a fast food restaurant. So that made me a little afraid of leaving. My hours are from 7 to whenever they decide to let me go. As a senior of the crew, I was making $8.75 an hour for 3 years. The minimum wage was raised up to $8 last year, and again it's been raised to $8.75. What made me feel good about Wendy's is that they're not really like a fast food restaurant. They do cooking like you would do at home. We do everything from scratch, the way you would do it at home. Potatoes are baked in the oven. We don't use a microwave to cook our food. Our meat is fresh from the grill. We don't freeze our burgers. The food is very good food. I feel that they need to stop looking at us as if we're menial workers and start looking at us as if we're professional chefs, if you will, because we do a lot of the work that chefs do. I think that they need to look at it this differently. A lot of people the customers will come in the store and they'll say, oh, ha, ha, you work for fast food. You're not getting anywhere. I'm not thriving. I feel that I'm becoming a pauper. I'm in debt because because I'm not being compensated fairly for the work that I provide for them. It's a problem when you work 40 hours a week and you can't pay your rent. My paycheck pays 2/3 of my rent, and that's about all I can get out of it. But the work that I have provided for them doesn't equal 2/3. I think it equals a lot more. And I would like to be compensated for the dedication and the loyalty that I've been showing them for 8.5 years. I haven't found anything that they would give that would help me to advance. When I first started working there, I asked about a 401k plan. And they told me that that's only provided for the supervisors. And I was a little surprised at that. And then last year, they came around with the paperwork for the 401k plan. Food is soaring through the roof. I need uniforms and clothing for myself. If I wanted to go somewhere out special, I wouldn't be able to do it because I don't have the money, I don't have the clothing, I don't have the motivation because of the depression and the stress over not being able to even pay one bill in its entirety. In order to pay my rent, I have to plan at least 6 months in advance to, and a lot of times I'm short. So during tax season, I can't spend a penny. What I do is I put it in the bank and compensate the paycheck that I get, supplemented with the money that I have from my tax return until it runs out. And then usually around the most festive time of the year, Thanksgiving, Christmas, that's when I run out of money. And I just have to go to rent court. I usually wind up in rent court until the tax season rolls around again. A lot of times my daughter will provide food for me so that I can eat here. My granddaughter who lives with me sometimes will take a job here and there, and she'll provide food. I always thought that, if I work hard, that I'll be rewarded for it. The reward I got was offered positions because of my dedication and loyalty to the company, and then they would skip over me. I don't know any crew who has done 7 days a week and still wasn't able to pay their rent. That's not right. I've had a hard life because of it. I couldn't buy the kids, I'm gonna cry. No gifts for Christmas, nothing. I have a newborn baby, a child who almost lost her life. She was born not alive, so I couldn't do anything for her except for give her me. And I think it's damaging the structure of this country, the way people are being treated, the way they're not being compensated. This is America, one of the richest countries in the world. Other people who have similar stories to mine, who are living in shelters with their children, who are devastated by the lack of financial ability to pay their rent. They can't eat. They can't buy clothing. And they're devastated by this. A lot of people are turning to criminal activities in order to survive. Eric Garner, who was selling cigarettes on the street and got killed for it because he wanted to provide for his family. I do cartoon character banks, and this all started about 20 years ago when I was sick and I was bedridden. I wasn't able to do much, and I had grandchildren. I wanted to leave them something to remember me by and to teach them how to save. This is one of the banks that I'm working on now, Superman. And it's my first one. I haven't done Superman before, but I was motivated to do it because it's the first one. Superman is a hero, and that's what I want to be. I want to be a hero for the cause of $15 in a union, a fair living wage.
This is a human rights issue, to be able to be afforded food, clothing, shelter, to be able to take care of your family. Everyone who wants to, who is able to, should be able to do that. These are the only jobs being created. People are working hard. Corporations are making tons of money, and people feel that they are not being properly compensated. So they've been organizing. They've been strikes, national strikes, international strikes, where they've walked off for an hour or half a day or something like that. And they've really gotten the message across that fast food workers are really pivotal to our society, our economy, but they have to be able to play a bigger role, a larger role, and they can only do that if they're compensated accordingly. I am absolutely a product of all that we're talking about here today, right? I was a low-wage worker, teenage parent, single parent by 30, and doing all these things, got lucky, took a test, became an advocate, and really did exactly what they're doing, advocated and fought to make things better. Consider that a lot of these businesses, a lot of these corporations are being subsidized by the city and the state and to provide living wage jobs, and that's just not happening. So you have to put pen to paper. You have to demonstrate when you can demonstrate. You have to organize when you can organize. And just keep it out there and tell that story, because no one tells us your story like you do, and quite frankly, your story is not as important to the next individual as it is to you, because they have their story as well. The universal pre-K. That is just phenomenal that young parents can now have somewhere that your children can have early child education and not daycare. At the same time, it's all day. So you don't have to worry about that babysitter. We can do that. The health care plan, that the national health care plan that is going on, the paid sick leave, and all the other things that the wraparound services that go along with that support the low-wage workers. It's happening. That'll make it a little bit easier, but at the same time, we continue to keep our eye on the prize. We're winning. It is absolutely a struggle, but when you see the access that has been gained, whether it's in the White House or whether it's in City Hall or it's in the State House, that real dialogue and real conversation is going on around this issue. When you talk to them, they're obviously very organized, and when they come out and they need support, then we have to support them on whatever level. And that means that sometimes we are not supporting these franchises that are treating workers poorly. That most of the time it is what has the greatest impact is your dollar. The segment of our society which has probably played the greatest role here has been our faith-based, have been absolutely phenomenal. So when you go to church, you go to the mosque, you go to the synagogue, have this conversation. And most of them are actually have social justice ministries that are just phenomenal now. And they're doing a lot of work. Get involved.
When I worked in this industry, I felt that my welfare was not a concern.
I work just as hard as anyone in America, just like all my coworkers, and we do not get paid vacation, paid sick days, health insurance, paid holidays, or 401k.
On several occasions, I've been asked to work on weekends without pay or any kind of compensation. The excuse the production company gave was the episode needs to be finished to meet deadlines. I was not getting paid, but the video editors I worked with were making double their pay, while the responsibility for completion fell on me. I once stayed with an executive producer until 3:45 a.m. working on an episode of a show to meet a deadline, and was expected to return to work at 10 a.m. the same morning. Again, I was not compensated or even offered transportation home.
don't see why this industry isn't regulated like any other business. I've worked 16-hour days, followed by an 8-hour turnaround, worked weekends without extra pay, and really only get my paycheck for compensation for anything. Reality TV is a cash cow, and the people who actually make it do not get taken care of well. Because I am a story producer, my complaints are mostly in post-production, where I routinely see shows that should be scheduled with 9 to 10-week edits by everyone's admission, including my superiors, are condensed to 5 to 7. The result is almost literally that I am forced to work double time. Often, 2 editors are brought in to work side by side and make the otherwise unfeasible schedule possible.
It is not acceptable to be expected to work all hours of the day and night, 7 days a week, and not be compensated or allowed to do anything about it. I often worked 70, 80-hour weeks during active production. And when you're freelance, it's almost always active production. There is little or no regard for people's well-being, and we're often put into difficult positions where it's either our safety and well-being or our job. I've had to go against my bosses when there are PAs who've had to work since 5 a.m. and are about to get into a car at midnight and drive 3 hours through a thunderstorm because there's no budget for their overnight. Instead, I booked them into a hotel and incurred the wrath of the extra expense.
Just 2 weeks ago, I was wrapping up a week-long shoot, which was 7 days straight and at least 16 hours a day. Preparing a 12-hour shoot day requires work from the producers beforehand and after. Our last shoot day that week started at 4:30 a.m. at a landfill outside Philadelphia, and our story required us to go into overtime, finishing our shoot at 6 p.m. After wrapping up the gear from the week, bringing the crew to dinner, and taking them back to their hotel, I had to return to New York City at 9 p.m. There was no room in the budget for additional help, and if I demanded it, it would reflect poorly on my skills. I found myself with all the windows down in the car, using the fresh air, a loud stereo, and guzzling energy drinks to stay awake. Aside from driving the vehicle, I was responding to text messages, emails, and using a navigation app on my phone to get home, where I had to store the company's gear.
I recently worked on a home renovation show where I was working 18 hours in the field, an additional 3 at home at the end of my shift, and working conditions were poor. There were no safety precautions taken, and we were working at homes that were completely dilapidated. People went through the floor regularly. Things were constantly falling, and if you complained, you were fired. Plus, everyone was barely sleeping, which added to the number of accidents which were occurring.
In June of 2013, I was at work, segment producer at MTV, and thought I had food poisoning. It got worse throughout the day, but I stayed and worked, even though I was turning green and was in incredible pain. I had deadlines to meet that night, and I didn't want to piss off my boss. At 8:30 p.m., I knew something was seriously wrong with me. It wasn't like any other sort of food poisoning I had ever had before. I still stayed and prepared all of my work and asked my AP to plug in the last information when the editor was finished. He stayed until 4 a.m. to do so. I told my boss I was really sick, and he rolled his eyes. I said, "No, I'm really sick. I need to go to the hospital. I have to leave now." And he was pissed off, but I left and went to the ER. My appendix had burst. I was in the hospital for 2 days. I worked from my hospital bed so my boss wouldn't get mad at me. In 2005, 2006-ish, I was a PA striking a set at VH1. I'm a 5'4", 120-pound female, by the way, so I was striking a set by myself, which included having to lift a prop television. I lifted it and herniated a disc in my back, L5-S1. I was too scared to report it to HR, as I was a young freelancer, and was scared that they would never hire me again. I stayed at work, crying in pain, and didn't mention it to anyone. Eventually, I thought maybe it would go away. Almost a year later, I was in so much pain that I was crying every day and miserable. I finally went to a doctor at HSS and started PT treatment. Because I had waited so long, I needed intense physical therapy to not only correct the original injury, but to correct the mountain of compensation injuries that piled up from a herniated disc.
As an AP, I had to drive very fast to have us catch our plane on a completely ice-covered road during a snowstorm. We passed several cars that had either been pulled over because the conditions weren't drivable or had wrecked because of the snow and ice. I begged them to let us wait for the next flight, but they refused. We got to the airport and our flight had been canceled, of course. I was then instructed to drive the 15-passenger van from Ohio back to New York. It was already dark by then, and I drove through the night. My call time that morning had been 8 a.m. We arrived when it was light outside. My worst experience was working for a company called Red Line Films, where we worked for around 18 hours without a break and with inadequate food and hydration in 100-degree heat. I began throwing up after a few days of this and eventually demanded to be taken to the emergency room, where I was given 3 liters of IV fluids. I requested to leave the shoot at the risk of my career and was flown back to New York City. There was a general vibe that I was weak, older, and just couldn't tough it out enough. Because of the budget on the show, the production CO had decided to not do location scouts. This meant that we had to not only shoot our footage, but to pre-scout on the same day, hence the insanely long days.
When I was working making the series for Sundance, my shortest days were 12 to 14-hour days. I worked through 2 to 4 weekends at a row at one point, and while I was paid for 2 weekends of work, I didn't have a day off for over 20 days. When I worked for RDF, now Zodiac, on the show Wife Swap for ABC, our shoot days in the field averaged between 14 to 17 hours a day for 12 days straight. After working multiple 20-hour days in a row, I complained that my driving ability was hampered and felt that I was endangering the lives of the crew members I was responsible for transporting. When I complained that the working conditions were unsafe and that if I were to get into an accident while driving 3 hours to my hotel that night, after working a 16-plus hour travel workday, no one would know I was hurt until the tapes didn't show up Tuesday morning. It was Saturday. The executive producer told me, "This is the job, this is what you signed up for." Nonfiction reality TV takes advantage of their employees' desire to succeed in a number of negative ways. It's a soul-sucking and depressing business. That's hard for me to say because this was the industry that at one time I was so passionate about. I've missed many crucial life events, weddings, funerals, anniversaries, and birthdays due to the unpredictability of shoots, and have had no say in their scheduling, nor additional compensation for many last-minute changes that have completely compromised my personal life.
Reality show workers must be as vigilant as other workers who have been fighting the fight and organizing and getting their message out. And I know it's a little different. These are different worlds that these folks are coming from, but their journey and their struggle is the same. And they have to get that message out. The content of the message is the same. And we, on the other side of the camera, have to do the same thing in supporting them. We want quality production to come out, but it's not going to be quality if you are not treating those workers with the dignity and respect that they deserve, if they're not being fairly compensated. And so if we know that this is occurring, that workers are going to be exploited, then we're going to stay away from those productions that are not really conducive to the fabric of New York City and our respect that we have for working folks. That is one thing that we can do. But also, we can get the message out to each and every one of the folks in government, in our community, faith-based, and just in our general walk of life to say, hey, here's what's going on. There's workers being exploited in this industry. I know reality TV is popular, it's sexy, but we are really contributing to the exploitation of workers here, and it has an impact not just on those workers, but on every working family in the city of New York. And so when we form that collective union of working people, we have a real voice, and so we have to be supportive. But I think what's most important that those workers, those producers and writers really take the lead, that they continue to get the information out, and then that we stand with them on issues. And so sometimes we're not trying to reinvent the wheel here. We just want to be in support of those who are on the ground doing critical work. And we may need to merge all of these struggling workers together on their common goals and common interests, and create one real movement, because it would be, it's a lot of talk about low-wage workers and fast food workers and so forth. Imagine them coming together with, they're not getting attention, or they're getting attention in a different way. No one's going to take these people serious in reality TV, because they're thinking, wow, you got it made, And so they have to tell that story. They have to tell the story of the long hours and no health care and none of the wraparound services and no paid sick leave and no paid days off and for the most part, people who enjoy those benefits, it's almost unfathomable that people, particularly white-collar workers like that, would have to suffer through that. Yeah, number one, you're over here, you're organized, become a part of a union, but there's also people out there struggling in the same way that you are, and that those collective voices will certainly strengthen you. When shows are really identified that they're exploiting workers, the workers may ask that we can write those companies. We are viewers. We are really concerned about your treatment of your workers, and we really like your company. We really like the work that they do, but we will no longer support that if you continue to exploit these workers.